Before we begin, listen closely, because some stories were never meant to be announced loudly, they were carved quietly, pressed into stone, and left behind for those patient enough to listen. There are moments in human history where silence speaks louder than words, moments when ancient scribes wrote something down but did not explain it. The Sumerians were like that. They did not write stories the way we do today. They recorded events, lists, observations, descriptions, and sometimes they described things they did not fully understand. This chapter begins not with myth, but with records. Clay tablets, buried beneath the soil of Mesopotamia, written over 5,000 years ago. Tablets that describe a time when the land shook, the sky burned, and powerful beings fought battles that terrified even their own followers. Not legends told around fires, but accounts pressed into wet clay by trained scribes. Slow down now, breathe, and allow the past to open itself. The Sumerians believed writing was sacred. To write something down was to preserve it forever. That is why they were careful, precise. They did not exaggerate. So when certain tablets describe cities being cut down, lands becoming silent, and skies filled with unbearable brightness, it forces us to pause. Because these descriptions appear suddenly, without build-up, without poetic framing, just events. One tablet speaks of a great confrontation among the Anunnaki, beings described not as spirits, but as rulers, decision-makers, commanders. The text does not call it a war directly, but the language is unmistakable. Commands given, weapons prepared, cities evacuated, warnings issued. This was not chaos. This was organized destruction. The Anunnaki were not distant gods in the way later religions imagined. In Sumerian understanding, they were present. They lived in structures. They travelled. They issued laws. They punished disobedience. And according to several fragmented tablets, they also fought among themselves. One line, damaged but still legible, describes a moment when the Lord raised the shining object and fear seized both heaven and earth. The scribe does not pause to explain what the shining object was. He assumes the reader already knows. That assumption is important. It suggests these events were familiar, or at least widely acknowledged. Another tablet, often overlooked because of its broken edges, speaks of a place where the ground was split open and nothing grew again. No flood, no storm, no earthquake mentioned, just aftermath. The Sumerians were excellent record keepers. They described floods in detail, they described famines, they described plagues. But this destruction is described differently, final, permanent, as if something fundamental had changed. What makes this unsettling is not just what they wrote, but what they did not. They did not describe swords. They did not describe arrows. They did not describe armies clashing hand to hand. Instead, they describe light, heat, wind, and sound. One text refers to a weapon that roared like the storm but burned like the sun. Another speaks of a breath that kills, passing over the land long after the battle ended. These are not the metaphors of farmers describing spears. These are the words of witnesses trying to explain something beyond their experience. The scribes often used symbols when language failed them. A single sign might represent fire, power, brightness, and authority all at once. Modern translators often render these symbols simply as divine. But divine does not mean magical. It means beyond human. When a tablet says divine fire, it may not mean mystical flame. It may mean a force that humans could not produce, control, or survive. Something that belonged only to the Anunnaki. There is a chilling calm to these records. No screaming gods, no heroic speeches, just consequences. One passage notes that after a certain confrontation, the people did not return, not fled, not migrated, did not return, and the scribe moves on. This emotional distance tells us something important. These were not stories meant to entertain. They were warnings. Archaeologists often struggle with Sumerian texts because the tone feels modern, detached, administrative. It reads like a report, and reports are written after events have already happened, which raises a quiet question. How many such conflicts occurred before this one? Enough that the scribes had a system for recording destruction? Enough that they did not need to explain fear? In several tablets, the Anunnaki are divided. There are councils, disagreements, orders reversed. At one point, a high-ranking figure is described as being removed from the place of decision. That is political language. It implies power struggles. And where power struggles exist, conflict follows. One of the most striking details is the way humans are mentioned. Barely. Humans appear only as observers, workers, casualties, never participants. The war described here was not fought for humanity. It was fought around them and sometimes through them. There is a haunting phrase repeated in multiple sources, written by different scribes across different cities. The day the sky changed. No explanation, no metaphor, just a statement. Something about the sky was different after the conflict. Brighter, darker, poisoned, silent. The tablets do not say. They assume you already know. What we are left with is a puzzle made of stone. Fragments that refuse to fit neatly into myth, but also refuse to align with primitive warfare. The Sumerians did not worship chaos. They feared it. And what they recorded here was chaos unleashed by intelligence, controlled, directed, calculated, a war, not between humans, but between beings with the power to change the land itself. Remember this, these tablets survived floods, invasions, fires, and time itself. They were copied again and again because the Sumerians believed they mattered, not because they were comforting, but because they were true. We will move closer to the heart of these records and examine the descriptions of the weapons themselves, not as fantasy, but as the Sumerians left them, quiet, unexplained, and terrifying. Rest now, and let the stones continue to speak. Before we continue, find a comfortable position. Allow the world around you to fade slightly, because what the Sumerians recorded is not something meant to be rushed. It is something to be absorbed slowly, carefully, almost like listening to the wind whisper through ruins. The Sumerians wrote of weapons, not swords or spears, not arrows or shields. These were tools that seemed to defy everything human civilizations had yet learned. Tablets describe objects that released fire from the sky, not fire from wood or coal, but fire that fell like a storm of sunlight, consuming cities in an instant. Whole walls vaporized, whole armies disappeared, and the sky itself seemed to bend in response. One tablet from Nippur, fragile and broken at the edges, reads, "The Lord raised the shining instrument. Its brilliance struck the land. Nothing remained where it fell." Notice the calm, almost indifferent tone. The scribe does not write with panic or awe. It is a report. The events are devastating, yet they are described with quiet certainty. This is not storytelling. It is record keeping. The Sumerians often paired these descriptions with symbols, circles with lines radiating outward. triangles with dots at their points. The exact meaning of these signs is debated, yet they appear consistently alongside descriptions of destruction. Modern researchers sometimes interpret them as cosmic diagrams. Others suggest they may represent energy or light. Whatever the case, the repetition is clear. The Anunnaki weapons were not like anything humans knew. They were controlled forces, deployed with precision. One tablet describes a device called the Flaming Eye. It rested upon a tall platform elevated above the battlefield. From this eye came rays that disintegrated matter. The tablet uses the phrase, "The ground screamed and the wind tasted fire." Pause for a moment. Think about what it means to witness the ground screaming. The Sumerian scribes are translating their sensory experience of something utterly foreign. It may not have been literally screaming, of course, but the terror and destruction were so total they had no other words. The flaming eye appears in multiple texts, often alongside a warning. Do not approach when the Lord has placed the eye above the land. Humans were clearly collateral, witnesses at best, at worst victims. Other tablets describe beams of light, not lightning, not fire in the natural sense, straight, concentrated, powerful enough to split buildings and leave a lasting mark on the earth. One fragmentary text from Uruk reads, "The bright finger moved across the city, walls melted, men and beasts disappeared into smoke, the wind carried screams that lasted for hours." Notice how the tablet emphasizes duration. The weapons were not instantaneous. They were drawn out, persistent, like someone deliberately testing their limits, not merely fighting for victory. A third source introduces the roaring disc. Unlike the flaming eye, this object is mobile. The tablet describes it as flying like a bird but heavy with anger. It hovers, it circles, then releases a fiery charge described as turning the air into molten rock. The Sumerian words are vague but intentional. The scribes were trying to translate the inexpressible into familiar concepts. Birds, rocks, anger. The combination gives us a subtle clue. These weapons may have moved through the air autonomously, or at least with precision guidance unknown to humans at the time. Repeatedly, these texts emphasize brightness and heat. One tablet notes, "The brilliance burned eyes. Hands could not touch the instruments. Even the wind carried warmth that blistered skin." Clearly the weapons were energy-based, not chemical in the modern sense, not explosive in the conventional sense, but some form of power that the Sumerians recognized as dangerous, overwhelming, and divine. Interestingly, humans are seldom given agency in these tablets. They are observers, workers, survivors, or casualties. One text explains, "The people fled, but their feet burned the earth. Their eyes saw nothing but light." The wording is deliberate. It is not hyperbolic. The scribes recorded sensory effects. Heat, blinding brightness, a landscape altered beyond recognition. Another tablet adds, "Where the weapon fell, the soil turned to glass." Consider that. Soil turned to glass, entire fields rendered uninhabitable, cities erased, civilizations impacted, and yet, in their descriptions, the scribes are calm. No embellishment, no pleas to gods for mercy, just observation. We can also examine symbolic references. Some tablets depict energy as lines radiating outward, almost like waves. In other texts, it is circular, spinning, pulsing. We might think of this as metaphorical, but the repetition and precision suggest an attempt at technical recording. These are not fanciful images. They are diagrams, reports. technical details embedded in mythic language. There is also evidence of layered weaponry. One account mentions multiple devices operating simultaneously, the flaming eye raining destruction on one part of the city, the roaring disc sweeping another sector, beams of light carving through walls and towers. The description implies coordination. These were not chaotic accidents. They were part of a planned strategy, executed with precision. Another intriguing aspect is the aftermath. The Sumerians are careful to note what happened after the attack, not just during it. The land smouldered for 7 days. The air remained bitter. Rivers carried no fish. Birds did not return. They are recording ecological impact, a level of detail that suggests these weapons caused not just immediate destruction, but long-term environmental change. It is almost scientific. Observation without commentary, just fact. Some texts mention aural effects. A voice of fire roared. It shook the mountains. The wind tore through the city and carried screams. These could be interpreted as sound waves. Perhaps the weapons produced energy in forms humans could perceive as both light and sound. Shock waves, resonance, the ability to terrify both human and animal alike. The scribes are attempting to describe experiences that overwhelm the senses. The texts also contain warnings. They are careful to instruct readers on distance, approach, and observation. Do not stand below when the Lord lifts the shining instrument. Only from afar may one record the event. Touch not the residue of the roaring disc. It burns still, even when the eye has left. This is not storytelling. It is operational knowledge. Rules of engagement recorded in stone for those who would survive. Interestingly, these weapons are often described in pairs or groups. One tablet mentions 3 instruments operating simultaneously. Another speaks of 2 lords, each raising a weapon above separate cities. The third describes a host of flames descending like stars. This repetition emphasizes systematic warfare, not one-off accidents or mystical punishment, but conflict with intent and coordination. Human response is minimal but poignant. One passage. The people prayed not to gods but to the wind itself, for the wind brought light and heat that no hand could stop. This illustrates the profound impact of the technology. Humans were powerless. Witnesses, survivors, chroniclers. The Anunnaki were both combatants and overseers. Humans were caught in the middle. It is worth noting that some texts describe failures or malfunctions. The instrument turned upon itself. Flames consumed the operator's own courtyard. Not all attacks went perfectly. This hints that these devices were crafted and operated by intelligence, capable of error or miscalculation. This is further proof that we are not dealing with metaphor alone. These were tools, deployed by beings who understood power in ways humans could not. Several tablets also speak of intimidation rather than destruction. The Lord lifted the shining instrument above the city. Fear fell before the first ray. The walls crumbled without touch. Here the effect is psychological as much as physical. The mere presence of the weapon, its brightness, its power, its potential, caused cities to collapse. This is warfare not just of force, but of terror. And terror leaves a mark, sometimes longer than physical destruction. Sumerian scribes also mention residual energy. Even when the discs returned to their stations, the ground smoked. Even after days, the air bit the throat. No one slept. Energy remained, lingering, persistent. It is as if the devices left an imprint on the world itself. The tablets never use the word magic. They do not mythologize the technology, they report. And the repeated calmness, almost professional tone, gives the accounts an incredible credibility. These are not legends meant to thrill. They are records meant to preserve knowledge, perhaps for those who would need to understand or survive such weapons in the future. Some of the most remarkable descriptions involve movement and targeting. The discs moved with will. They chose their targets. Nothing could escape the path. Autonomous, intelligent, precise. The Lord did not point. The object moved as if by thought. The city vanished before commands were given. Notice again the lack of exaggeration. The scribes do not shout. They do not declare miracles. They describe outcomes, matter-of-factly, terrifyingly. In summary, the weapons described by the Sumerians released intense energy, heat and light, operated autonomously or semi-autonomously, left long-lasting environmental effects, were coordinated and systematic, induced fear as effectively as destruction, were recorded with calm precision, suggesting operational knowledge. This is warfare beyond human scale, conflict conducted with intelligence, not chaos, destruction executed with purpose, not frenzy. Notice the subtle warning embedded in every line. Humans are small observers in a larger world. Even the mightiest civilizations can be erased. Even the skies themselves can become instruments of war. The Sumerians recorded these events without flourish, almost as if instructing future generations. Learn from this. Witness this. Remember. The tablets are silent witnesses speaking across millennia. And as you drift closer to sleep, imagine the brilliance above ancient cities, the heat radiating through streets, and the quiet, precise movements of devices far beyond human understanding. Find your calm. Settle into a quiet space. Allow your mind to drift slowly. We move now from the physical devastation of the Anunnaki war into something subtler, more mysterious. The language the Sumerians used to describe these extraordinary events, a language not of words alone, but of symbols, light and power. The Sumerians were not merely scribes, they were observers of energy. Every line they etched into clay carried meaning beyond simple language. Some symbols represent matter, some movement, some forces invisible yet undeniable. We call it writing. The Sumerians called it a record of reality. To understand these texts, we must see them not as literature, but as technical manuals wrapped in metaphor, because what they describe cannot be fully conveyed through ordinary words. The tablets speak of light as force, not just illumination. A common term appears across multiple sites, zagam, often translated as brightness or radiance. But contextually, it seems to signify concentrated energy capable of moving, shaping, and destroying. One tablet explains, the zagam flowed from the Lord's instrument. It consumed stone, it turned water to vapour, it bent the wind. Notice the verbs, consumed, turned, bent. The Sumerians were describing manipulation of natural forces, not magic. They were reporting experience. Symbols accompany these descriptions. A spiral with radiating lines often appears beside zagam. Circles with dots at their centre appear alongside descriptions of discs. Triangles accompany flames. Modern scholars debate the meaning, but one thing is consistent. The symbols repeat across tablets separated by decades, even centuries. Repetition implies precision, not myth, not random doodling. Instruction, knowledge, observation. In some cases, the scribes describe colour. The light blazed white at its centre, red at the edges, green in between. This is remarkable. We often assume ancient texts could not describe subtle distinctions of energy. Yet the Sumerians observed what they saw, recording spectrums, not just brightness. Why would they bother? Because colour mattered. Colour may have indicated intensity, temperature, or type of energy. Even modern physics uses colour to describe energy output, and the Sumerians, 5 millennia ago, noticed it. Another important concept is directionality. The tablets often describe instruments pointing, rotating, or sweeping. The Lord turned the shining eye east. Its rays struck the city and then turned north, consuming the fields. This is not poetic, it is operational. The Sumerians were describing targeting, trajectory, and effect. It implies control, precision, intent. These were weapons as much as instruments of light. The Sumerians also described the interaction of light and matter. Stone became as liquid, metal quivered and blackened. The air burned the skin without contact. Notice the emphasis on cause and effect. The scribes are not dramatizing, they are documenting. The language is clinical, but the content is extraordinary. These are events humans could not replicate or survive, yet they observed them carefully enough to record every effect. Some texts introduce the concept of stored energy. The Lord lifted the disk. It had been waiting. Its power surged and released upon command. The idea that energy could be contained, transported, and then unleashed is repeated across several sites. This is not metaphor. This is a description of technology in action, understood and documented by the Sumerians in a language both symbolic and literal. The tablets also differentiate between types of light. Bright as day, destructive, overwhelming, hot, cold light, radiant but not consuming, used for observation, pulsing light, rhythmic, perhaps signalling or controlling, searing light, weaponized, aimed at cities, causing permanent change. The scribes consistently pair these descriptions with diagrams, circles, lines, and spirals. Interestingly, the tablets describe human interaction with light. Those who saw the Zagam without protection were blinded, their hands burned, their thoughts confused. These are physiological effects, not symbolic ones. The Sumerians observed sensory impact, how the human body reacted to energy beyond its capacity. They also noted emotional responses. Fear gripped the watchers. Some fell to their knees, some fled. None survived unchanged. The language of power is also hierarchical. The Lord controlled the light. The warrior held a lesser ray. The worker only observed. Notice the layers. Supreme control belongs to Anunnaki leaders. Operators execute orders. Humans witness. This hierarchy reflects strategic use of energy, not random chaos. It also shows that the Sumerians understood the relationship between energy, authority, and consequence. Another remarkable feature is the description of interaction between multiple energy sources. Two disks moved in opposite directions. Their light clashed and split the river. Stone shattered and the wind howled. The tablets imply coordination, interference, and amplification. Energy interacting with energy. Intentional, controlled, devastating. Some texts hint at modulation. The brightness was increased slowly, then released in bursts. The sky roared. The earth shook. The people trembled. This is deliberate use of force, not instantaneous destruction. It suggests mastery over timing, intensity, and direction, concepts entirely lost to humans for millennia. The Sumerians also recorded lingering effects. Even when the instruments returned to their stations, the fields smoked and rivers carried bitterness. The wind was heavy for days. Not only was the light destructive, but it also altered the environment, and the scribes noticed. They documented changes in soil, water, and air, a level of observation that modern scientists find extraordinary. Symbolism intertwines with technical recording. Circles equals energy nodes. Spirals equals motion or rotation. Radiating lines equals direction of emission. Dots equals intensity or focus points. This combination of text and symbol creates a language of power, a way to document something beyond ordinary comprehension. The tablet suggests safety protocols as well. Do not stand beneath the shining ray. Approach only from behind the barrier. Only scribes may observe. Again, operational, precise and deliberate. Not myth, not legend. The Sumerians are reporting knowledge designed to preserve life and understanding even as destruction occurs. Another subtle feature is emotional neutrality. The scribes do not dramatize or sensationalize. They do not appeal to gods. They do not include moral judgment. The instrument burned. The city fell. The land was altered. Plain, calm, observational. This detachment is chilling. It underscores the reality of the event. Destruction observed without human intervention. A final feature is legacy. The Sumerians frequently repeated warnings. Record what you see. Do not forget. Teach only to those who must know. It is almost as if they anticipated a time when knowledge of these energies would be vital. A time when humans might encounter similar forces. The symbols, diagrams, and descriptive language were not for storytelling. They were a manual, a record, a testament. The Sumerians had a language of power and light, a system to describe forces that were both destructive and controlled. They recorded effects on matter, humans, and environment. They documented operation, safety, and hierarchy. And they did all of this with precision, calm, and clarity, ensuring that knowledge would survive beyond the chaos. Let this knowledge settle slowly. Let your mind absorb the power, order, and mystery of what the Sumerians observed. And know that this is only the beginning. We will explore the scars these weapons left on the land itself, the permanent marks etched into history, soil, and stone. Settle into a quiet space. Take a deep breath. Allow your mind to drift slowly over the lands of ancient Sumer. The ground itself carries a story, one carved not by hands, but by forces beyond human comprehension. This is not about myths. It is not about floods or legends. It is about concrete, permanent impact, the lasting scars left behind after the Anunnaki War. It is about what the scribes recorded and what remains, waiting to be observed millennia later. The first impression is subtle. A plain, barren field might hide millennia of destruction. Sumerian tablets describe cities once bustling with life, now silenced, their streets cracked, their walls melted. The land lay still. Even the wind spoke differently. These are not poetic exaggerations. They are consistent across multiple sources. From Ur to Nippur, from Eridu to Lagash, the same pattern emerges. Land permanently altered, fertility reduced, rivers carrying residues that poisoned life. Some tablets are surprisingly technical. The soil hardened as if struck by stone. Water became bitter, carrying ash. Crops failed for seasons beyond count. Here the Sumerians are noting agricultural impact. They observed that energy unleashed during conflict did more than destroy cities. It reshaped ecosystems. Fields that once grew wheat, barley, and dates became infertile. Rivers that once teemed with fish ran dry or carried ash and silt. And entire forests, when they existed, disappeared. The scribes catalogued this carefully. They were not exaggerating. They were documenting survival. Archaeological evidence partially aligns with these descriptions. Sites excavated in southern Mesopotamia reveal layered destruction, burnt mud bricks, vitrified soil, and collapsed structures. Evidence of sudden, intense heat far beyond what ordinary fires could produce. Some scholars describe this as ancient urban burn layers, but the Sumerian records provide context. These were not accidental fires. They were intentional, targeted, and immense. The tablets also speak of the texture of the land itself. Where the shining instruments fell, the earth was smooth, as if glass had flowed across it. Stones fused together. Paths disappeared. This is extraordinary. We think of stone and soil as immutable. But the Sumerians observed and recorded changes in matter itself. They noted fusion, vitrification, melting, effects that modern humans might associate with high-energy physics or plasma-like phenomena. The language is calm, clinical, yet the implications are staggering. In addition to the ground, the Sumerians documented water contamination. Rivers carried the bitter taste of metal and ash. Fish fled or died. No rain could cleanse the currents. This is an observation of ecological aftermath. Even after the weapons ceased firing, the land bore their mark. Crops, livestock, and human settlements struggled. Repeatedly, the tablets emphasized duration, not just immediate devastation, but lingering consequences that affected generations. Some sites describe geological shifts. The hills cracked, valleys deepened, stones moved without hands. This may be metaphorical, or perhaps not entirely so. The Sumerians were careful in their descriptions. They distinguished between natural events and events caused by the shining instruments. The repeated mention of cracks, fissures, and displaced stones suggests real physical transformation, possibly caused by extreme energy or intense heat. The scribes were chronicling what they saw, even when it defied understanding. Evidence of scorched cities appears consistently across texts. Walls of the city disappeared, towers melted, streets were gone. The Sumerians did not embellish, they did not add drama, they noted outcomes. And the pattern is clear. Multiple cities, across decades, bore the same marks of destruction. These were not isolated events, they were systematic campaigns. A war fought with energy rather than armies. The tablets also describe residual phenomena. Even when the lords returned to their stations, the air remained heavy. The land smoked. Silence persisted where noise once thrived. These observations suggest that the weapons caused lingering environmental effects, perhaps chemical changes, perhaps residual heat, perhaps energy that the land itself absorbed. The scribes recorded it because it was notable, because life itself changed in response. Human settlements are often described as abandoned. The people left. None returned for seasons beyond count. Their homes remained as shadows. This is important. Unlike floods or invasions, this destruction left permanent evidence. Humans could not simply rebuild immediately. Fields remained infertile, rivers poisoned, soil burned or vitrified. The scribes noticed and recorded both human and ecological displacement. Some of the most chilling accounts describe mutated or altered life. Animals that survived bore marks of fire. Their fur was blackened, their eyes bright. Children born afterward were pale and weak. It is impossible to know the exact nature of these observations, but the Sumerians were documenting change in living organisms, not mythic exaggeration. They noticed patterns and recorded them with care. The scars also extended to infrastructure. Paths disappeared, canals cracked, Walls melted, bridges became rubble. The Sumerians depended on irrigation, canals, and urban planning. Destruction of these structures was catastrophic, not just for cities, but for agriculture and survival. And the tablets show that scribes meticulously noted which structures were affected, how, and for how long. Some tablets emphasize psychological impact, linking the land's transformation to human perception. The land whispered differently. The wind carried sorrow. The people trembled at every sound. Even after physical damage, the environment seemed haunted, altered in ways humans instinctively understood. The scribes recorded both reality and response, a holistic observation of effect. Repeatedly, the Sumerians highlight scale. Entire plains were darkened, rivers ran black, hills glowed as if fire had passed. This is consistent with other accounts describing weapons of light, energy unleashed over vast areas, impacting terrain, cities, and populations simultaneously. The language remains calm, matter-of-fact, almost scientific. This is observation, not legend. Archaeological correlations support these descriptions. Burnt layers in cities dating to periods consistent with Sumerian tablets, vitrified soil in select locations, signs of abandoned settlements, evidence of sudden intense heat or fire without natural causes. It is rare, fragmented, yet compelling when cross-referenced with the texts. Interestingly, some tablets hint at recovery processes. After seasons, the wind carried new seeds. Grass returned slowly. The rivers cleared, but bitterness remained. The Sumerians noted regeneration, but also noted limits. Land was scarred for generations. Some places may never have fully recovered. The tablets also describe residual energy in objects. Discs left behind heat. Walls retained light. Stones hummed with power. Objects touched or affected by the weapons were not just physically altered. They retained some energy, imperceptible, but noted by observers. Again, this is a meticulous recording, not mythology. Human adaptation is also documented. The people moved their cities. They changed crops. They avoided plains where instruments had passed. This demonstrates both resilience and fear. The scribes chronicled behavioral response to environmental trauma, linking human survival to the impact of these weapons. Some tablets describe geometric patterns in destruction, circular zones of obliteration, lines radiating outward from central impact points, alternating areas of intense damage and relative safety. This implies strategic deployment. Energy concentrated with intent, leaving measurable effects on the land. The most haunting phrase appears repeatedly: the land remembered. It is subtle, brief, but profound. Not a metaphor for human memory, but for the imprint of destruction on the earth itself. The Sumerians recognized that the planet itself bore witness. Its soil, stones, rivers, and plains retained the record of conflict. The pattern is unmistakable. The Sumerians observed and recorded permanent structural destruction, environmental transformation, long-term ecological impact, altered human settlement patterns, residual energy in objects and land, psychological and behavioral consequences. This was not storytelling. This was observation, meticulous, calm, and persistent. Take a deep breath. Imagine standing in the scorched plains of ancient Sumer long after the weapons had been lifted. The soil fused, rivers bitter, cities empty. The wind carries faint echoes of destruction, like a memory embedded in the landscape. The scars left on the earth are a record of power beyond comprehension, a reminder that even in a world ruled by humans, forces can reshape the land itself. Let the images of melted walls, glass-like soil, and abandoned plains settle gently in your mind. And know that in the next chapter, we will explore how these events transformed human memory into sacred myth, and why the war became legend whispered across generations. Settle in, close your eyes if you can, and allow your mind to drift back through time, through cities melted by light, scorched plains, and lands that remembered every touch of fire. We have followed the Sumerians' records from the first signs of conflict, through the weapons of incredible energy, and across the scarred landscape they left behind. Now we explore what happens when humans remember, and how witnessed events become sacred stories, transformed across generations into myth. The Sumerians were careful recorders. They documented not just the events themselves, but human perception and reaction. Humans are storytellers by nature, but when humans witness forces beyond understanding, they adapt observation into narrative. The line between memory and myth is subtle, and yet over time the line begins to blur. Tablets reveal hints of ritualization. The people offered thanks to the lords who wielded light. They carved symbols to remember. They sang songs of warning. These are the seeds of myth. Human response transforms observation into ritual. Symbols and songs preserve memory, but they also mystify the event, translating incomprehensible force into terms humans can grasp. One remarkable tablet notes, "The watchers spoke of the lords as great and terrible. Their light was not fire, but spirit. Their will moved the earth." Here the Sumerians are bridging the observed and the incomprehensible. The energy is no longer simply physical, it becomes a manifestation of divine intent. The human mind needs something to hold on to, a moral, a story, a sacred order. And slowly, history becomes legend. The transition is gradual. At first, scribes write what they see, then generations repeat the story. Exaggeration creeps in, not to deceive, but to make sense. The lords hurled fire from the sky, cities vanished, mountains trembled. The events are the same, but the language becomes symbolic, moralized, ritualized. Humans need meaning. Witnessing destruction alone is not enough. Interestingly, the tablets record both awe and fear. Some fell to the ground in reverence, some wept at the brightness, some prayed for guidance from the lords. This combination of observation and emotion creates the framework for sacred narrative. It is not storytelling for entertainment. It is storytelling for comprehension, for survival. Humans must explain forces they cannot control, and so they ascribe intent, morality, and divinity to them. Later civilizations inherited these stories. Symbols, rituals, and songs passed down. Eventually they became codified as legends of gods and divine retribution, though the original events were very real. The fiery weapons became the domain of deities. The scorched lands became sacred or cursed ground. The energy once observed as power became interpreted as will of the divine. This is humanization in action, transforming raw, incomprehensible force into story. One tablet is particularly striking. The lords of light descended. They judged the people. The land was transformed. The people were afraid and worshipped. Notice the wording, judged. Humans naturally ascribe intention to powerful events. Even if the forces were simply operational weapons, humans interpret them as acts of will, acts of morality. Over centuries, this transforms factual observation into sacred myth. The scribes often record instructions alongside memory. Carve these symbols, sing these songs, teach children of the Lord's power. Forget not the day the sky changed. This preserves memory while shaping interpretation. It ensures that knowledge of power survives, but slowly becomes sacred and symbolic, rather than literal. The tablets also hint at human adaptation through story. We tell of the Lord's brightness not to frighten, but to guide, to keep the people safe, to remind them that power must be respected. Storytelling becomes a tool for survival. Humans cannot fully comprehend the technology, so they encode it in ritual, symbol, and legend. The sacred story preserves meaning, even as literal understanding fades. There are subtle patterns across multiple sites. Energy weapons become divine instruments, leaders become gods or semi-divine figures, cities destroyed by fire become sacred ruins, survivors encode rules, warnings, and morality into ritual. This is not accidental. It is systematic human interpretation of catastrophic events. Interestingly, the Sumerians also preserved technical memory within myth. The shining eye burns still if misused. Its path is known to the lords. Only they may command it. Here we see remnants of operational knowledge embedded in legend. Humans retained practical understanding, even while framing it as divine action. This is why studying myth carefully can sometimes reveal clues about lost technology or power, embedded in allegory, waiting for those who observe closely. The process is natural. Humans witness extraordinary power, then encode it with emotion, fear, awe, reverence, moral framing, intent, judgment, justice, symbolism, fire, light, celestial imagery, ritualization, offerings, songs, teaching. Over centuries, these components transform raw observation into sacred narrative. We see this reflected in later Mesopotamian cultures. Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians inherited Sumerian stories. Names and roles of the Anunnaki evolved. Weaponized energy becomes lightning of gods or flaming swords. Observed effects on land and humans are remembered as divine punishment. Even though the original context, coordinated energy-based war, is obscured, the core events remain encoded. The tablets also reflect psychological processing. We feared the shining lords. We did not understand. We wrote symbols to remember. Humans must contextualize experiences beyond their comprehension. By embedding them in story, ritual, and symbol, survival is possible, both physically and mentally. Without myth, the memory of destruction might fade entirely, leaving only fragments. Myth preserves memory, gives it shape, and makes it teachable. Some tablets hint at intergenerational teaching. Children are told of the brightness. Mothers tell the story at night. The people learn to respect power beyond their own. Memory becomes socialized. Sacred myth serves as cultural continuity, linking generations through story. It is remarkable that we still uncover these echoes today. The Sumerian records are the foundation of human attempts to remember, interpret, and reframe events too vast to understand. Another intriguing feature: myths often merge multiple events. One tablet describes the flaming eye, another the roaring disc over generations. These become tales of a single divine entity wielding power. Humans simplify. They merge sequences into archetypes. This is how history becomes legend, and legend becomes sacred myth. The final transformation is moralization. Destruction is no longer neutral. It is a lesson, a warning, a story of obedience, respect, and divine order. The brightness came to remind the people of their place. Those who obeyed were spared. Those who resisted suffered. This is human necessity at work, interpreting raw events through ethical and narrative frameworks. And yet, even in myth, the remnants of reality remain. Vitrified soil becomes cursed, earth-melted structures become sacred ruins. Survivors become priests, scribes, or storytellers. Rituals preserve instructions about proximity, observation, and respect. The sacred story thus encodes fragments of original truth, waiting for those who can decode it. By the end of this chapter, it is clear that witnessed events transformed into sacred myth through several intertwined processes: observation, recording what was seen; emotion, fear, awe, reverence; symbolism, light, fire, celestial imagery; socialization, teaching next generations; moral framing, embedding ethics and meaning; ritualization, turning observation into practice; cultural continuity, preserving memory across time. Imagine the process. The first witnesses saw light they could not comprehend. They felt fear, awe, and helplessness. They wrote, carved, and etched what they observed. Later generations repeated the stories. Symbols replaced precise descriptions. Rituals encoded operational knowledge. Gods emerged from humans' need to explain power. And now, thousands of years later, we rediscover fragments of these events in tablets, myths, and ruins. We see truth hidden in allegory, knowledge preserved across millennia. Allow your mind to drift through the quiet, sacred memory of human history. The weapons, the light, the scorched earth, all preserved in clay, in ritual, in story. The war once recorded in stone, the fire that burned the sky, the land that remembered, and finally, the sacred myths that survive. All form a continuum of observation, interpretation, and human adaptation. Through calm reflection, we see not just destruction, but the resilience of memory, the evolution of story, and the human drive to understand what is beyond understanding. Rest in the awareness that the past and its stories continue to live in our consciousness. The Sumerians documented, humans interpreted, and myths endured. The sacred memory of the earth, the sky, and the light of unimaginable power remains with us, quietly, waiting for the patient observer.